can go ahead and get started. I always like to try and keep these on time, knowing that everybody has lives and things to do after stuff like this. So good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is our very first Alumni Insights virtual engagement series session. So you're part of the first cohort. So that's exciting. And we're really pleased to be able to start this series because it's starting to put our alumni in the spotlight for the cool and amazing things that they're doing. So I'm very excited about this series, and I'm working with a lot of faculty at Otterbein to find all the alumni that we want to feature in it. So if you know of anybody that you want to recommend, please shoot me an email. I'm Dana Vieta. I am a class of 1996 Otterbein grad. Was a PR major, and I'm now helping to lead the Office of Engagement, which includes engagement of our alumni, our donors, and our current families and friends of the university. So just pleased to be here with you tonight and looking very much forward to this topic. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Callie and Claire, and of course, Dr. Shelley Payne from Otterbein for being here tonight to lead this discussion. And want to let everyone know that we are recording this so that we can share it with others on our website and others that couldn't be here tonight. So looking forward to hearing more on this topic. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Dr. Shelley Payne. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dana. Well, welcome everyone to what we hope is a very engaging topic for you all. When Dana was, kind of seeking out with our group of faculty members some, ideas or topics that maybe would be relevant to a larger audience of not just alumni, maybe in our own area in allied health or health and sports sciences, but perhaps to our broader alumni. This topic obviously came across, and I knew just the two people I wanted to kind of knock on their doors to see if they would be willing to talk to you all this evening. So we are so fortunate to have two very successful alumni with us this evening to serve as experts on our panel. Not only are they experts in their field and certainly successful alumni, they are even more terrific human beings. And so I'm honored to serve as host for this evening. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dr. Shelley Payne. I'm a professor in the Department of Health and Sports Sciences, and I run the Allied Health program. And I was fortunate to serve as the primary instructor for both Dr. Studebaker and Dr. Legendre in their time here at Otterbein, and just have awesome experiences with them as students, and getting to see them work incredibly hard and achieve their goals of getting into occupational therapy school first and foremost, which is no easy task, and then watching them as their careers have evolved. So without further ado, all great stories start with a great beginning. So Callie and Claire, why don't you tell me a little bit about your time at Otterbein? We have kind of a good mix. I know from looking at the list of participants here, we have a nice mix of alums, but we also have some current Otterbein students that are on the Zoom tonight. So, at least briefly, can you talk about what classroom and maybe out of classroom experiences that made your time so special for you here at Otterbein?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. My name's Callie. And I currently live in Delaware, Ohio, so definitely close to Otterbein. And I think from the beginning, like Otterbein always felt like a second home. It was very homey to me. And I was fortunate enough to play softball there for 4 years, where I got to connect with my best friends that I still talk to today. So that's an even bigger bonus. And I think if I could go back and do it all over again, I would. It was probably like the best 4 years I could have had in college. So definitely grateful for Otterbein and the experience I got. Even like, I don't know, I just felt like no matter what class I took, I always felt super supportive by all the staff, no matter what department it was in. So I think the relationships that I built in the classroom, on the softball field, or just in campus, like those are what shaped me and prepared me for life after Otterbein. And I married a Cardinal, so that was helpful. And now we have 2 little girls right now. And yeah, things are good. And I have Otterbein to thank for a lot of it.
Yeah, I second so much of what Callie said. I saw a few months ago Shelly at work because we run into each other at work all the time. And I told Shelly that I was like, seriously, I'm like, I feel like I would not be where I am today, like without her and without the supports like that Otterbein provided me. So I really enjoyed my 4 years. I feel like, just like Callie said, so many of the things within the classroom, I think a lot of the like small class sizes and a lot of the more like personalized experiences that gave were super helpful. I feel like in my undergrad, I just got so much hands-on experience that I feel like once I got to grad school, like everyone has hands-on experience, but you kind of start to see how everyone got it in different ways. And I feel like clearly, as Laura is here, but at my time at Otterbein, I feel like I got not only like experience, but also just a lot of like mentorships and supports that I've like carried on through grad school, through like starting a career and things like that. So that was great. And kind of out of the classroom, I always say, you know, a big part of being an OT is being a very social person. And I spent a lot of my time in the admissions office, but I always say that was a great like kind of ground to form a lot of those, like, you got to make a lot of chit chat, a lot of like those people building skills, things like that. Sadly, you know, I've not married a cardinal, but I always say my true Otterbein success story is that Erin, who she's a Spanish teacher, but she was my random roommate freshman year. And she's currently in the other room. So we're still roommates to this day. So if you know, you need to publicize that anywhere that random roommates turn out well. That's one of the best, you know, Otterbein success stories. So.
We will pass that on to housing. They work on that random roommate questionnaire works out sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Okay, so after Otterbein, you guys both attended graduate school. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that grad school experience led you to your career in either kind of a direct or a winding path?
Yeah, I'll take this one.
You're going to take the winding path?
Get it going. I'll take the winding path. So after Otterbein, I did not get into grad school right away, but it ended up being the path I needed, and I just didn't realize it at the time. So I worked at Nationwide Children's Autism Clinic, gained a ton of great experience, and just learned and grew so much in that year that it just, I don't think I could have got through grad school without that experience. And it has also shaped me into the therapist I am today. So I was accepted into Kettering College doctorate program and graduated in 2018. I also had even more experience at Nationwide Children's through my fellowships and doctorate experience. So I took all of that and I moved to South Carolina and lived down there and did early intervention. And I was in the kids' homes. Absolutely loved being in the home setting. And I felt like the only part that was missing as a new therapist was some mentorship. So I ended up moving to Virginia and found a private outpatient clinic. And that is where I felt like I gained all the experience I needed as far as mentorship and support. They really encouraged very specific continuing education courses that I took. And that just brought me more clarity and confidence when it came to addressing different sensory needs and addressing just a wide variety of diagnoses. And that experience alone, I felt just so much more confident in myself. And then we moved back to Ohio. And I just took my EI experience and I took that private outpatient experience and decided that I wanted to create my own business. So right now, I am a mobile private therapist and I work in the children's homes, which is fantastic. And yeah, I see about 12 to 16 kids a week. And I've been doing that for 2.5 years. So I've built a network of other providers and other business owners that are in similar field as me, some speech therapist and physical therapist and psychologist. And I just think owning my business has been probably the best personal and professional development experience I could have had. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at today. That's definitely my winding path, but here I am.
Claire?
So I'm kind of on the start of my
path.
So I went into grad school right after undergrad. I went to Ohio State for my doctorate. So right after Otterbein, I did 3 years there. That was really a great time to kind of get my feet wet in all the different areas of OT. Going into grad school, I was definitely very interested in pediatric OT. Like I felt like that was like the lane I wanted to be in. But grad school kind of opened up my eyes to like how many different areas of OT I really enjoyed. In occupational therapy school, you have to do some like major rotations. And that was all during lovely COVID times for me. So during those rotations, I actually did not get a pediatric placement, which at first I was like a little bit frustrated with, just a little bit nervous for kind of how it was going to set me up down the road. So I ended up for those doing an acute care and an inpatient rehab placement, which kind of threw me a curveball and showed me that I guess I really love almost every area of OT. So coming out of grad school, I was honestly pretty open setting wise. I was looking like more primarily at pediatric jobs, but I was pretty open. And so I have been working at Nationwide Children's for a little over a year, about a year and a half. I started there, so like last September. I work in outpatient therapies. So I kind of thought it was a great starting place to really see a wide variety of kiddos, diagnoses, ages, things like that. Just as a new practitioner, I kind of wanted to get a little bit of a taste of everything. So right now I am at one of the outpatient locations at East Broad. So I do 4 days there. I see anywhere from 9 to 11 kids a day. And I will be transitioning soon to a new location they're opening up on main campus for a few days a week, where I'm going to be seeing a lot of kiddos in a co-treatment program, which we've already started at our other location, but seeing a lot of kids who have a lot of like complex behavioral needs, safety needs, functional deficits, things like that. So yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at currently.
Excellent. Dane, I don't know how you kind of want to mend the chat. I've got kind of I would certainly want to get us into the topic of neurodivergence. Rebecca, are you okay if we just kind of hold your question for a second and then I promise we'll get back to you? Okay. So the topic tonight is, kind of identified neurodivergence. So for you guys, what does neurodivergence mean? And how would a parent, a care provider, a loved one, how would a parent know if a therapist is neuroaffirming or not?
Yeah, I think Claire, did you have anything? Do you want to?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. I think a neuroaffirming model is just about approaching therapy in a way that like embraces the fact that there is diversity in human neurology and just understanding that there are differences in our ways of thinking and moving and feeling and just being a human. So, and I just think that because we have differences, it doesn't mean that like one neurology is wrong and one is right. And I think it's just about like embracing and validating other people's like lived experiences. And we're not attempting to like fix someone's experience. And I think we're just attempting to like validate that experience and then help them to like understand their own like personal way of thriving. So I feel like if you're looking for a neuro affirming therapist, you might see this shift away from strategies that focus on teaching neurodivergent people to like fit in to an approach to where we're like nurturing self-compassion and just more self-understanding and like self-awareness. And I think I've really tried to hone in on this as well as like being a private therapist is being just very strength-based and like family-centered. Since I am in the home, it is about the family, and maybe we're providing like more environmental modifications than we are trying to fix the behavior, and strengthening skills and just being very like strength-based and trying to build that like internal motivation in children. And I also think you'll see more of a shift away from like that compliance-based model that you'll see sometimes with like behavioral models of therapy to more of like an internal and a deeper understanding of like internal regulation. So for me, I've kind of dove deep into the world of like interoception. And if you like need a resource about more about interoception, I would follow Kelly Mahler. She's an OT. And and yeah, just really focusing on building that like internal awareness to build their confidence and self-awareness.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I think that was, I was going to say, I think that was like a really excellent overlook at it all. I feel like, just like you said, I feel like thinking a lot about how like everyone is coming to the table with like a different set of how we like think about things, learn, process, etc. And just like you said, of like not looking at it through like a deficits model, and like not thinking about just because someone approaches this differently than you doesn't mean that that's a deficit. It just means that like that's how they approach, think about the situation, etc. And I think super similar to what Callie was saying of I think just having a lot of open conversations with like your therapist, your provider, etc., to really get to know like kind of your provider's like outlook on a lot of things. I think like Callie said, sometimes you have people who may approach it from more of like a compliance, like behavioral modification approach, things like that. And for some families, that is more of like, I think what some families may desire, but I also think sometimes it's our job as therapists to kind of like show them what other options are. Because I think a lot of families, like you might get the diagnosis and things like that, and it's just like all this information kind of put in front of you at once. And so I think that it's important, like, well, people are looking for therapists or as a therapist ourselves to just really do a lot of education, like from like neurodivergence and neurodiversity standpoint. And so I think just having a lot of really like open and honest conversations about like what families' own goals are, how those might not fit our like normal or strict developmental trajectory, and how that is a completely okay thing too.
Yeah. How do you guys, well, talk to me about, do you really think that any sort of inpatient treatment occurs with this, with identified neurodivergence, like true inpatient, or do you feel like these children and families are directed more, you know, kind of immediately to outpatient care and or private practice?
I would say that from my perspective and kind of how I feel like we see things triaged at Children's, I feel like typically it goes to outpatient services. I know that I've had a number of kids who have then like went to inpatient services, usually more during a time of like behavioral crisis, like psychiatric crisis, things like that. So I feel like we have had some kids who go because it's just like currently at the time, like behavior wise, safety wise, things like that, like parents feel like they can't manage that in the home. So sometimes they will go inpatient for strategies with that, help with like medication management, things like that. I also think we see like I feel like a pretty high number of like teens, like kind of the teens, middle school age, things like that. I think about really a large percentage of like the neurodivergent population who we see, who oftentimes have a lot of like mental health, like crises, difficulties on top of that. And so I think a lot of kids will go kind of the inpatient route for that when it's a similar time of like crisis, things like that. So that's really the time that we see inpatient from our side.
Kind of Claire, sticking on that, what do you feel like in terms of when you have a patient with identified neurodivergence, what do you think their treatment plan, or could you describe kind of what that typical outpatient setting at a nationwide children's, you know, outpatient therapy setting, and what does that look like in your, you know, billable 45-minute, you know, segment time?
Yeah. So it'll kind of vary based off of like each kid's individual needs. So we can see kids like one time a week. Usually we see them for like 45 to 60 minutes. So either like one time a week, every other week. And really length that we see kids is completely up to like progress, therapist outlook, like family desire, things like that. Some kids we might see as short of 4 to 6 months. Some kids might be there for like receiving outpatient treatment for 3 to 5 years. We like through Children's, we've implemented, the site that I'm at is kind of like the one who's been more on the forefront of it, but we're doing a large co-treatment program. So we're seeing all sorts of different kids within the program, but a lot of like autistic individuals, neurodivergent populations. And through that, we see the kid with speech therapy as kind of a way to like maximize their time and like hit on all those functional pieces that when we're individual, we might be trying to hit on, but is really more helpful when we see the kiddo together. And in that model, we structured it to like an episodic model of care. So we see kids for 10 weeks. So they come in once a week for 10 weeks. And then they have 10 weeks where they don't come in the clinic, but we give a lot of home programming. And we kind of started to implement that because one thing they were seeing is with a lot of these kids who may be in therapy from like age 2 to like age 14 continuously. It's just been a lot of like burnout, a lot of kids who are like understandably like tired of coming to therapy week to week and things like that. So they kind of started that program as a hope to like better meet the needs of that population.
Robin has a question in the chat that fits in right now. Like, what ages are you guys kind of talking about as children? Claire, I know Nationwide has a pretty tight definition, so maybe you can go first.
Yeah. So we see kids really anytime from birth to 18 years. So usually around like 17 to 18, we start to try to talk about like transitioning out, transitioning to like adult-based services, things like that. So yeah, ours is kind of bookended right between that.
Okay, now I'm gonna let Callie take the floor a little bit. So Callie, 2 questions. I want to certainly make sure you see the question in the chat from Rebecca about, I'm a business owner in the pediatric intervention space. What would you say has been your biggest challenge in your first couple years? And then I'd really like you to talk about maybe how your treatment plan in kind of your unique environment differs, you know, in terms of what it's able to, you know, provide for families in a different way, for people that might be looking for something other than outpatient.
Yeah, for sure. I'll start with Rebecca's question real quick, because being a business owner is definitely a challenge. I think my biggest challenge at the very beginning was building my caseload, and that took businessy type skills I didn't have, like marketing and all those fun things. I actually hired a coach, which is one of the best decisions I made. She built her a PT practice that was mobile as well, and it was also online. So she started to coach other therapists on how to build their own private practices. And I was with her for 6 months and just learned all the ins and outs of business things. And yeah, definitely if you're wanting to start a business, hire a coach, because that's not something we've learned. And it's just a different skill set. So I think that, and then I think the other challenge too, which I'm still working on, is just building, like, I miss having a network of other therapists around me. And so that piece of like being in my car, just driving, listening to podcasts, not being able to like pop in an office and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Or do you have a new idea? That piece I'm sort of missing, but it's definitely starting to grow a little bit as I'm like building my own network virtually and then also with other business owners in the area. So I think those are the biggest challenges I've come across just owning a private practice. And then as far as like treatment planning, we're definitely similar. I usually start around like age 3, once they've like aged out of EI, is when families are like, okay, we also want to continue services after early intervention. So usually I see between like 3 and 6, I would say. I really kind of niche down into that population I really enjoy, but I do have a couple older kids that are like in the teenage years. But I think that's very uncommon for me to see them reach out just privately, I guess. But I also do agree with this episodic model that Children's is kind of adapting to, because I also felt the same kind of burnout when I was in the outpatient clinic of seeing kids. They were there from 2, and then I started seeing them. I had like a 16-year-old on my caseload, and he was there since he was 2 years old. And I was like, what are we doing here? So like, I've always felt this, like, I need to work myself out of a job when I'm seeing a kid, and I need the family to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how do you implement this in home. So that's why I was really passionate about going back into the home and giving family strategies that they were using in outpatients. Like, we use swings a lot, we use a lot of sensory strategies, but how can we get that same input in the home? And that's kind of been my whole thing with my business, is just building their resources at home and then giving them all the education, all the resources I can, and then letting them kind of be on their own and do other things. So I think that episodic model of care is my preferred, but I definitely see some kids could benefit from continuous, but I think it's really rare.
Yeah.
If you ever want to feel absolutely terrible about your own parenting skills, follow Callie on any of her socials. Because like the work she does, you know, her own children are her own little like playground, and like
They are.
just going to talk about like the coolest like sensory integration. Like, you know, I was proud because I put my children on like a Theraball when they were young to work on their core strength, and you know, that was about it. You know, she's got them like in all kind of sensory, you know, there's rice and there's just all kinds of cutting and just all kinds of just integration. So if you ever want to feel really bad about your parenting skills,
Yeah.
follow Callie's social media.
If we need more ideas, hit me up.
I think I'm out of that phase, maybe until, I don't know, the next generation of my life.
Right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm done with that. A couple questions in the chat. So for either of you guys, let's see. Have you ever worked with a child that had autism and ODD? If so, what were your challenges?
I would say like I saw that come up and I was trying to think on like my current caseload if I have any kids that currently like have both diagnoses. I know,
and maybe for the larger group, ODD.
Yeah. So like oppositional defiant disorder.
Thank you.
And so, good thing I have that in my head. I was like,
thank goodness, I didn't
all
mean
the
to put you on the
acronyms.
spot.
I know. But so I feel like we see a lot of kiddos who come in with both an autism and an ADHD diagnosis. I would say that is like typically like pretty co-occurring. I would say that a lot of the kids on my caseload who currently have an ODD diagnosis do not have an autism diagnosis. I know that like not specifically with the correlation between autism and ODD, but I do feel like sometimes there is a mix right now of almost like of kiddos with like, do you have the right diagnosis, or also like when did you get diagnosed like in life? And I feel like sometimes I have a lot of kids who are coming in who are more in the like 9 to 12 range, who kind of got to that point at school where like a lot of these like functional deficits might be presenting more. And so I feel like sometimes those kids come in with a diagnosis of like ADHD or ODD or just general like behavioral health concerns. And then I feel like I've seen a lot of parents who have kind of like led the way of being like, hey, I think this could be a thing, but like I also think there might be more going on here, like a diagnosis of autism spectrum, things like that. So I kind of feel like I've seen the opposite of kids coming in with just an ODD or ADHD diagnosis, and kind of families bringing to the table of like, hey, I would like to look into like what more might be going on here. Yeah.
I just want to add too, if there's the ODD diagnosis or possibility of it, I feel like bringing in like a psych consult or family consult would be really beneficial to start, because I feel like OT could be great, but I feel like at the right time when there's been other like strategies put into place as a family unit when it comes to ODD.
Hopefully that answered your question, AJ. From John, Claire, you guys kind of mentioned this, and Callie, you said, you know, you hope you work yourself out of a job or like yourself. How do you handle patients that are in fact kind of burned out?
I would say that I feel like we've been having a lot of like open conversation with families of like kind of trying to give the permission to take a break. I think that a lot of families feel like you know, like Callie said, sometimes like the door is always open to therapy, which is wonderful. But sometimes I think it can feel like we are just continually doing OT with like no clear end point. So sometimes I think like a lot of families need that permission to like take a break and to be able to like look at like, this is the progress we have made so far. Like you are doing like X, Y, and Z tasks that like maybe you haven't been able to do before. And kind of just like giving parents those advocacy skills for themselves. I also feel like we've been trying to really shift a lot of care to like really focus on like kids' interests and like what ultimately does this kid like want to do, like what is meaningful for like the kiddo, because I feel like we see a lot of kids who, let's say it's 7 and it's like we are still working on tracing your name, which is like marvelous and something we can fully still work on. But a lot of times I think we sit down and start to have the conversation of like, is this something your kid needs to do? Is this something that like they really want to do, or is like an activity that they are getting purpose, meaning, and happiness from? And so I think kind of trying to have those conversations to make our treatment more meaningful to the kids and also to have a more clear trajectory of like where we want to take this care so they don't continue to get more burned out.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that for sure. And I feel like you hit it on the head when like giving parents permission to take a break. I feel like parents have it in their head like, I'm doing right by my child by taking them to therapy, and you are, but you're also doing right by your child to give them a break and to maybe explore like other like social settings, like doing a class or doing just going to the park. I feel like that in itself could be beneficial. So I definitely agree with everything that you just said too.
What do you guys, so Melissa, great point. I don't think breaks are explained to parents. I've also seen that in the orthopedic realm where, you're dealing with kids that have more of a long-standing orthopedic diagnosis that you're dealing with. And, that there just are times where you hit a bit of a plateau and, whether it's just related to physical or psychological growth, you're kind of waiting past that, and so what are some signs that you guys can kind of see? I'm going to ask it in 2 ways. What are some signs that you see in your patients that tell you that they're experiencing some burnout? And what are maybe some signs that you're seeing in families that tell you the family needs a timeout?
I think for the kids, it's when they like really don't have that motivation, that drive. Even if we do try to bring in their interest and try to make it as motivating and as fun as possible, we start to see a lot more pushback. And so that's when I'm like, okay, maybe like taking a couple weeks off, or maybe we take a longer break. And then if I'm also seeing from parents, like if I'm asking them questions about like, hey, did you try this week? And this is like, no, we just didn't get to it. We didn't have time. Like, oh, it's okay. And just seeing more of like the lack of motivation on both ends. And you'll even see it from like myself or another therapist that we're just like, we're trying our best, but it's just still like, I still feel like on both ends, the family, the kid, and the therapist, like you can start to like have that feeling that we're all just kind of like at an end point. And maybe like Clara said, like the door to therapy will always be open. It's never like we're discharging and saying goodbye forever. I just think a break is sometimes necessary.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was Rebecca. Someone said that parents deserve breaks too. And I think that that is like a big component of it. And I feel like Callie, you probably see a lot of kids too, who like have been getting all these services for years and years, and they are getting like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, all that sort of stuff. So I feel like a lot of parents will also just like, as you're having conversation, kind of show that burnout of just like, this is really challenging to like maintain that schedule of going to all of these appointments and also still like maintaining a high quality of life for the family outside of those. So we'll also have talks about like having a break, but with like individual therapies of like, maybe right now, like occupational therapy is right now, this is like our least favorite therapy. It's what's causing us the most stress. We're having like the least engagement, but like right now we're doing great in physical therapy. So I also think like thinking between the therapy services that the child is getting, like where could we take a break? And I know kind of related to kids and burnout, I think a lot of times kids present with behaviors. And so we always kind of have to look at like what is causing this behavior. And I know that we like kind of started to see just an uptick with kids that it's like they're kind of quote unquote showing up to the clinic with like a big increase in behaviors. And I think a lot of times we could tie that to like kind of the lack of motivation to be here, like even the transitions back and forth are becoming more difficult than they typically are, like sometimes showing more signs of like dysregulation or like things that just kind of like seem out of character for the child. And so I feel like we kind of look at that a lot too as an indicator for the kiddo that they're getting burnt out. And I think it's important, like a lot of kids who we see are nonverbal. And so both like they may have an AAC device that they can communicate with you, but also like some of these burnout feelings that they feel might be harder to express. So I also think really trying to like ourselves as therapists and with parents, like really keep an eye on those like other signs that they might be showing you that they are burnt out.
Yeah. And I'll just add too, real quick, in terms of burnout, and if OT is still like necessary, or if OT is like your only therapy, changing therapists could be like a world of difference, or changing settings. Cause I feel like I said, like therapists can get burnout too, and we start running low on ideas or running low on motivation. And then I'm like, Claire, what do you think? And like she's coming in with a whole new set of eyes. And like we all like OT is all about being like creative, and there's no like set thing that we can do to like help. But I feel like every OT has their own like unique perspective and lens that they can offer a child, and it can be a world of difference. So
From the chat, how many of your patients are getting other therapies at the same time as OT?
and a lot.
A lot. Yeah.
I would say if they're autistic, or I would say they're most likely going to be getting speech therapy as well. Majority of the time. I think it's pretty rare for a child to have a diagnosis and only have OT.
Yeah.
I'll put my oh, sorry, Claire. I didn't
No,
mean to
I was
stop.
just gonna say that I fully agree. I think I would say bulk of the kids that I see, I would say that the one like kind of subset of kids is I feel like we get a lot of kids like with like sensory processing difficulties, sensory processing disorder, or like more of just like an emotional regulation piece. I would say that that's probably the only subset that I see that would only be getting occupational therapy.
Yeah.
I'll put my physical therapist hat on for 1 second, since I think I might be the only one on the call, maybe. But you know, I think that the one thing you know, Claire and I do get to see each other at Nationwide Children's now and again. And the one thing I'll say, and this I think with PT, especially with children with identified neurodivergence, you know, in physical therapy, we're looking for such gross motor, you know, gross motor related goals. And oftentimes there becomes a cap that you're waiting for another kind of milestone, you know, that you've really kind of reached this place where, again, the child is getting really burned out. You know, you can only work so long on increasing dorsiflexion and, you know, and then, you know, they have the AFOs and it's just this long game, you know. And so I feel like, especially in this population, having a really good PT that you are well connected with, but one that you're absolutely willing to shut the door on, is really critical in this population. That but then on the other side of things, and I hope we do have time to talk about this a little bit, because I know I have some students on here that have worked a lot with our Best of Both Worlds programs. And Claire, I think you were a part of that when you were here as well. You know, there's someone asking in the chat, what ages of kids are you talking about? And, you know, I think one of the areas that we have to as clinicians, as researchers, as professionals, we have to make some inroads, is what happens after 18.
Mhm.
You know, what services still become available to these adults, and how do they access those services as adults? You know, how do they not end up with obesity related concerns? Because again, regular physical fitness is not necessarily adaptable to them, right? Gyms don't fit exactly. So, you know, that's something else. So sorry, I'll get off my soapbox on that. So maybe we'll have time at the end. Let's see. Dana, from a motivation standpoint, what kinds of rewards or incentives, motivations are used to help children make progress on their journey? OTs, you guys are all like feel-goody people, like reward out the yin yang.
It is true. Today I had to give a consequence today, and I felt so bad about it. I was just like, "Ooh, I don't know if I can do this." But I feel like rewards and motivators are like anything under the sun. Like I feel like that's something that we try to really like cater to like the niche interest of a kid. Of like it could be like the most random like one kid loves watching like these like hamster maze videos. Like it could be something as specific as that, but just something that is like really enjoyable. I think also like pretty easily attainable for the kid. And I think we think a lot about also like making sure we're using the right kind of motivators. So trying to steer a little bit away from like food-based things or like sensory activities. I think a lot of times in occupational therapy, sometimes it can be easy to use like so a sensory activity. So like Callie said, like a swing, going through a tunnel, things like that is almost like your reward break time. And I think being conscious of giving those breaks for kids to get sensory input and get regulated, but also not always tying that to a reward where we're like limiting your access to those things you need to regulate just because you like didn't complete a task.
Yeah.
Boy.
I might even say too, I try not to use rewards. I try to make it more like internally motivating for the child. And for me as an OT, I feel like I've found my reason of why I was put on this planet. And it was because I build a connection and a relationship with children, and I have the most joy and fun with them. And it's all about how they are internally motivated versus me saying, if you do this, we can swing, or if you do this, we can do a game. It's more like, it's very much child led, and I'm just building upon what they're already doing and playing with. So I try to steer away from them, honestly.
Robin has a question in the chat. I sort of addressed, but I am not the expert. I'm just supposed to be the moderator. So how do young adults transition after age 18?
I was gonna say, Callie, if you have any specifics, go right ahead. I had one kid who I had on my caseload recently transitioned like in winter time. He had a diagnosis of like cerebral palsy, so it was like a little bit different with like parent concerns and things like that. So they honestly had a lot of support for that transition through like social workers, like care coordinators who kind of help them like figure out those community resources. I know that they were looking into like how they could get some more of those like physical therapy, occupational therapy services in an adult-based setting, looking at, like Callie said, those community supports. I also think through them, I learned tons about just all of the like legal and guardianship things that parents have to go through too during that transition period. So I think that's kind of a big component that we can't necessarily help with, but I think is another thing on the plate for like a lot of those families.
And I think school has a lot to do with transitioning as well. Like on their IEP, it starts at like 14 or 15. What are we doing to prepare them for after high school? And if they have an IEP, they should be able to get that support from the school.
And I think Rebecca's right. The local boards of developmental disabilities, opportunities for Ohioans, disabilities options for adults, the kind of the growth of the work transition programs, I think are, great options. That's our connection to our Best of Both Worlds program here on campus. So, I think that those are great options as well. Okay, we are at the 7:45 mark, which I kind of gave myself as a, I don't know, cut it off in terms of, I do have just a few PowerPoint slide or just a couple slides I want to share at the end, just with some resources for you all that'll take 2 seconds. But Dana can obviously, if you email you any of these resources after the fact as well. Does anybody, want to turn your mic on and ask any questions to Claire or Callie? Everybody's super comfortable in the chat.
I have a question to both you ladies. What if you have a client that is motivated, but the parents aren't? Do you ever run into that? And how do you deal with that?
For me, I don't see it a ton because I see parents are seeking me out as a private therapist. So they got skin in the game. They're paying me privately. They're motivated. So I don't know if Claire has that experience, but for me, even like thinking back to my outpatient, I feel like I've sold some parents come in, sit in the waiting room, not come back and watch, and just doing right by their child to bring them to therapy, but not like super involved. And it was just honestly for me, just trying to provide as much education as possible and just doing the best that I could. I can't motivate a parent. I can't provide that internal motivation for them. It's got to come from them. But in my business last 2.5 years, I haven't seen it. So I don't know if Claire has any other experience.
Yeah, I would say similar of like, sometimes I feel like we'll get, yes, exactly. Like you said, a lot of the parents who are like, they're doing the right, they're bringing their kid to therapy. I think sometimes it's also in a super understandable way. It's like, I think for some families, it's like, that is a great 45 minutes where it's like, of like personal time for like you as a caregiver. So sometimes I feel like we'll see like that a lot. So same like Callie said, I feel like just giving a lot of education. And like we usually go out, talk to parents, caregivers at the end, and not in any way that like, if you really sense that they're like, I don't want to talk, I'm not going to push it, but still just trying to like give them as much education as we can. Sometimes I feel like we see a little bit more with like older kids, teenagers, things like that, where it might not be as much as like caregivers aren't invested, but maybe like caregivers and our clients see like kind of the problem or set of difficulties from really opposite lenses. Like sometimes with kids with sensory processing difficulties of like, sometimes I think caregivers can be like, this isn't a big deal. Like we should just be able to shut it down, things like that. So I feel like a lot of times I try to just like be a big advocate for the kids and like really give a lot of like positive affirmation and like positive affirmation like for the kid to the parent of kind of showing like, trying to really show like the work that the kid is putting in, like how it is helping them, like how they feel like it's helping them, to kind of like, you can't make someone take information that they don't want, but just really kind of trying to like be an additional voice for the kid.
Thank you.
Robin has a question that she submitted. So let's see, sorry. Supporting neurodivergent youth and religious exploration. My role is a volunteer class leader in a Unitarian Universalist Association religious education curriculum. I grew up in the UU Church, so I have been embracing my role to serve others and give back to the best of my ability. Sorry, Robin, was there more of a question about how that you wanted to pose to Callie or Claire?
So, hi.
Sorry.
To join. I'm an alumni. I graduated a long time ago
You're
in
welcome.
1994. Yeah, I guess just I'm learning more about this space, and particularly as I interact with youth. My husband's ADHD and mildly bipolar, so I have that a little bit. My husband has actually an autistic client who's an adult in their 20s, mid-20s. He helps with model railroading And my husband's really involved with Scouts too, and a co-ed high adventure program for 14 to 21. So yeah, I mean, kind of, for me, or, perhaps, for him too, those of us in those spaces with youth with identified neurodivergent, like, I'm not the expert. There's a lot I need to learn about it, but just, I don't know. I don't want to take up too much of, hints or tips for things I could check out or tap into to learn, just either in the classes that I'm supporting or just being with youth. Right now, I'm supporting a class that's 11 to 18. And certainly, but yeah, how to help myself understand better so I can interact with these youth in a way that's, gentle with, not that I wouldn't be anyways, just appropriate ways, because we're a community. We're community, based faith traditions. Sorry.
Yeah, I feel like doing these things, and I'm sure you're already doing a lot of research on your own to try to best support them. You can obviously tell that just from you speaking. So I feel like doing that, maybe even getting like an in-service from an OT to speak to the group and to speak to you guys about specific strategies for that unique environment. Because I feel like there are some, like maybe some adaptations that you could make to either the curriculum or to what you're trying to teach them and the environment, and give them just more sensory strategies to best support them and their unique needs. Because I feel like without really like being in there and knowing like who they are, what they're doing day to day, it's hard to give like a really specific, like, you should do this. But maybe just providing like more general education to the leaders and who's working with them, from an OT that can come in and really like give you more specific instruction.
Yeah. I feel like too, off of that, especially since you're working with kids that like are a little bit on the like older end of the spectrum. I think that like clearly we're here to help them like learn more about themselves and things like that. But I feel like I have like continuously been surprised at like how much, both like as they're figuring out the world, I feel like kids that age also like have kind of identified a lot of things that like work well for them and maybe don't work well for them. So I think also like just kind of inviting them to like join in the conversation and like having conversations about like, so like based in just like the curriculum, the things you do, of like, what are ways that we could make this like more accessible and better for you, whether that be like Callie was saying with like sensory-based supports, things to support attention, things to support like the way that we're like learning and intaking information. I think that like I think that kind of once you like start the discussion and just like almost like open the floor, I feel like the kids might be able to like give you more info on just like some like simple supports of even just like, can we dim the lights a little bit and like to make my day a lot better or things like that. I know that I think it's, I can put the website in this, but the like Star Institute, I think that's
Yes.
Yeah, they just have a lot of, sometimes I give that out. It can both be like cumbersome because there's a lot of information, but they have just a lot of general like info, kind of initial education on like sensory processing and kind of like the systems that are impacted by it, that sort of a thing. That I think is just a easy tool to kind of look around with to gain some more info on that.
And those are awesome responses.
Yeah,
I think this
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. I think this piggybacks another submitted question. What inroads are being made with teacher training in this area? So maybe more traditional classroom teaching, I guess.
Yeah, I know that we, well, one, as I feel like a lot of my friends are teachers, so I feel like just in general conversation, so we do a lot of problem solving back and forth together. I think we tried to make a lot of contacts with the school to kind of like be like, hey, tell us about like what difficulties are going on in the classroom, what we can recommend. I will admit, like sometimes I think that is a challenging piece of like bridging that gap, especially for a lot of kids. I feel like we see a large number of kids who are kind of like with general like mental health diagnoses, emotional regulation, sensory processing challenges that do not like get OT services at school. And that can be a challenging place because it's like, sometimes I'm like, I wish I could just go into your classroom, sit down with you and like brainstorm things in there. So I think just trying to have really like open communication with like teachers and things like that. So yeah, we just try to do a lot of like communication between the two.
Yeah, I think school OTs do a really good job as far as like spreading more knowledge about best supports in the classroom and doing it more from like talking to the administration about the importance of providing sensory supports and other ways to support children with neurodivergence. So I applaud the school OTs for doing that because I feel like that is like a roadblock for some when it comes to really engaging in their education.
Yeah, I also think too off of that, I feel like I've had a lot of conversations with teachers of giving teachers kind of just the knowledge of like what occupational therapy is and like what our services really encompass of like, just like Callie was saying, like sometimes in the school setting, like it can be, you know, really narrowed down to like we're working on fine motor things. But I think like equipping like teachers and school staff with like what our scope is can be really helpful with them like then advocating for students. My roommate who is a middle school teacher who like they do not have an OT there, but I know she was once or twice went to like team meetings and kind of been like, hey, like I see that this kid is showing like X, Y, and Z red flags. Like, would it be possible like that they could get like OT supports? Like sometimes the school can initiate it, but it's outside of the school. So I think just like equipping more people with that education of like what OT can do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on that end, one of a great question. So Laura Klubuk is an awesome friend of our programs. She's supported so many of our interns, and she said, obviously, so great hearing from you both. Since I mentor college interns, and we have a lot of my students on here who are getting ready to embark hopefully upon that grad school journey, she would love to know what you both would recommend to those students as advantage, what they should take advantage of in terms of opportunities before applying to OT programs for grad school.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of OT programs already ask for hours, observation hours, but getting into different settings. I was able to see PT, I was able to see a hand therapist, I was able to see children's, just getting a lot of experience. But for me, what solidified it for going towards OT was volunteering at a camp for kids with muscular dystrophy. And I was trained by an OT on how to handle children doing their ADLs. And I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. And I was a program director, so I was able to adapt all of the different programs in the camp to meet their needs for them to be able to participate. So that's what kind of drew my love for OT, and just getting that hands-on experience for 2 summers was the best thing I could have done.
Yeah, I say super similar. I feel like you said, everyone comes in with hours. I think sometimes it's great to have like a lot of hours with one place too. So like you said, like getting exposure to a wide variety of areas, but then also kind of showing that like you've consistently stuck with one as well. And I think just like Callie said, like kind of finding opportunities that show like your involvement and your growth in skills like related to OT. So I think a lot of those like community involvement, like activism, like social engagement, things like that, that are kind of all those like human skills that like you need for being an OT too. Like I think that that's sometimes helpful to have. So like you're not just coming to the table as like, here's me with my hours and my grades, but also like here's me as a person. So like just trying to like round out all those experiences with it too.
Kira was worried we wouldn't have enough to cover like an hour, and I think we could probably go on for 2 hours. I could have Laura talk for like another 45 minutes on like, you know, how she sees like, you know, Laura's the biggest the biggest PT/OT that I know, and you know, so yeah, we absolutely could go for another hour. So we'll consider this a huge success. Current students that are on here, I want to give a plug, and Janie, you can tell me if this is right. Is next Tuesday our Health Professions Club meeting? Is that right? Come on, Janie, help me in the chat or turn your mic on. or Megan, somebody?
She said yes. Yes.
Okay, sweet. Because I think, you know, some of the exciting things that these guys have talked about is the integration, right, of the therapies and of the fields and of, you know, just all of these things that are really about serving patients to the best of our abilities. And whether it's parents working with therapists, working with church leaders, working with teachers, you know, working together, I think that that's really where the fields are moving. And I think there's no greater time to be excited to be in the therapies than there is right now. And for people to be empowered to have the choice of, I want to work in a supported environment for a while at Nationwide Children's. And Callie talked about the importance of that, of being mentored, you know, earlier in her career so that she could build. But cash-based therapies and private practice therapies, those opportunities are limitless. And so thank you, Janie. Monday, April 1st, 5:30, Towers 112. We'll have a PT come talk about her foray into cash-based PT and, you know, just again, kind of opportunities that are open and different and for people looking for their own goal setting. And I think that that's in this time and place of healthcare, I think that you continue to see, and what I think is so exciting for me that across my time as a therapist was really the increased advocacy of patients and families for themselves, of really thinking about what they want, what their family's desires are. And I think that, you know, that's a exciting time when people can have that voice and when we can empower them to have that voice. So without further ado, I want to say thank you to our panelists. Dana, I'm going to turn it over to you to close it out.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thank you, Callie, Shelley, Claire, all three of you for being here tonight to share this great information. I know I didn't know a lot about this subject coming into this, but learned a lot and really appreciate your insight and expertise. And I think that people, whether they realize it or not, they probably know someone that is neurodivergent, and things like this help us to have a better understanding and to enlighten our understanding of people that are dealing with, you know, these challenges. Thank you again for being here. Please check on the alumni website. It's otterbein.edu/alumni for future alumni insight sessions that we're going to have, as well as all the different events that we have. And if you do not think your contact information is current right now with the alumni office, I would encourage you just to check out that website as well and submit some updated information for us so that we can keep you apprised of everything going on. But with that, we'll let you out and have a nice evening, and we appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I did just drop my own personal email in the chat. So Claire and Callie both had some resources, but if you want to reach out to me directly, love to hear from any of you. You know, there's certainly amazing alums. I'd love to promote, you know, both their work and their practice. Callie just dropped her own email in there. She's even better. So they're just kind of a bevy of resources. And like I said, as amazing as they are as professionals, they're even better humans. So really glad to spend the night with you guys.
Thank you for having us. This is fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining and giving us an hour.
Thank you. Have a good night.